When we call a color warm, is that just some arbitrary term that people use, or do warm colors physically warm our body? It turns out that when we experience color in the form of light, physics has the answer. And once you understand it, you're on the path to the actual psychology of color. It's also a key principle that helps us to understand circadian design, where we build products that are more harmonious with the cycles of light that we experience day and night. So, if you'd like to understand the science behind warm colors, stay tuned. Welcome. My name is Brian Kugelman, and I'm a behavioral scientist, and I specialize in using psychology for digital products. So, here's why this subject matters. Our experience of color psychology sits on top of physics, and the emotional associations that we have with warm and cool colors are not arbitrary. They trace back to the way light interacts with our physical body. And without understanding how light impacts us physically, it's hard to make any sense of how it impacts us psychologically. In this video, we'll cover three things. First, we'll geek out a little bit by defining what warm and cool colors are from a bit of a physical perspective. Second, we'll really geek out and go through some scientific papers that help us understand why warm colors physically warm our body. And third, I'll go through why color temperature scales use the opposite terms for hot and cold or warm and cool. And this is just so that we don't mess things up when we're working with circadian design principles versus regular visual design principles. Let's start with the color wheel. One half is warm, where we have reds, oranges, and yellows, and the other half is cool, with greens, blues, but we also have violets, which sort of straddle the line between warm and cool colors. But here's the problem. Light doesn't actually work as a circle. It's not a circle. The color wheel represents our psychological experience of color, but that's not how it actually operates in the physical world. Color works as a line. It's something that we call the color spectrum. However, in the language of physics, the color spectrum is just another part of the electromagnetic spectrum. The visible light that we see, where we describe colors, sit in a narrow band running from about 400 nanometers on the blue end to somewhere around 700 nanometers on the red end. And here's the physics. Shorter wavelength carries more energy per photon than the longer wavelengths. This means that blue light is higher in energy and red light is lower in energy. Now consider this. If blue light carries more energy, shouldn't blue light warm our bodies more than the red light? However, there's a counterintuitive reason why it's the red light that physically warms our body, not the blue light. To understand why warm colored light physically warms our body, I'm going to take you through a chart. I built this by extracting data from two scientific papers to create a holistic perspective that will help us understand what's going on. And if you'd like to see the citations, check out the video description. So there are actually just two things that really matter in terms of making warm colors physically warm our body. The first is how deep different light penetrates into our skin, and the second is the type of molecular structures that the light interacts with. Let's take a look at this chart and I'll walk you through it. So what we have are these gray bars that run across it, and they correspond to the axis on the right with skin penetration depth. And as you can see, is that when we start in ultraviolet light, it doesn't penetrate as deep into our skin. And as we go into blue, just a little bit more. But as we're getting warmer and warmer with the colors, right? We're passing green and now going into yellow and orange and red. We're having deeper and deeper penetration, and it even goes off the spectrum into the infrared light. The second factor that matters is the types of molecular structure that different colored light interacts with. So if we go back to the chart, we have the axis on the left, which shows the absorption coefficient. What that means is that for different molecular structures that exist within our bodies, how much energy do they absorb from different wavelengths of light? And let's start off with something not really related to color psychology, but more for our health, and that's DNA. So here we have on the left, the little pink chart, pink line here, and that shows DNA. So you can see that ultraviolet light, when it's lower, basically it's more dangerous, and it's going, walking towards where we would have harmful radiation, that it starts causing more and more damage to our DNA. And now the second thing is, let's look at how it impacts physical temperature. So what we have in blue is water. So what you could see is that ultraviolet light also physically warms us up. However, it doesn't penetrate as deeply, so it can't reach as much water. But check out what happens in the color spectrum. When it enters into the color spectrum, right, it sort of dips a little lower, and then water starts interacting with light a lot more as we get warmer and warmer. But also remember, it's penetrating deeper and deeper. So what that means is that warm colored light penetrates deeper into our skin, which can reach more of the water in our body, and it also transmits more energy to it. So basically, warm colored light physically warms our body, and we just went through it. So that's how it works. My take on this is that a lot of our emotional associations with warm and cool colors trace back to these physical effects. And our body has been learning that red equals heat for a large portion of our life, and eventually we start to take on these associations and ascribe them to the colors that we interact with and that we also use in interactive design. One more thing before we wrap up, and if you're interested in circadian design, this is an important gotcha you got to look out for. So there's a second color scale that we use in design, and it's called the color temperature scale. But not a lot of designers know about it, and it works differently because it's a number system based on temperature in Kelvin. And so let me walk you through it and explain the basics of how it works. So the color temperature scale starts, somewhere around 1,000 Kelvin, and around there it's sort of like orangey red. The red is not as predominant in this variation of the chart, but often it'll be more orangey reddish. And then it goes towards lighter and lighter, and then up we're somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 Kelvin. We're hitting more like a white light, and then as we go up higher, it's going into like 9,000, 10,000. Then we're getting into blue light, and you can think of this as the type of light if you were to see a piece of metal heated up. Let's compare something that's confusing. I put together the two scales. Now, here we have the regular color spectrum on the left, and we have the color temperature on the right. Now, here's the problem. Because energy is going up, right? But light manifests in different ways in the color temperature scale. Our problem is that when a temperature is extremely hot, it turns blue, which is what we would call a cool color in the regular scale. And then when it's very low, right? When it's actually cooler, because it's a lower temperature of Kelvin, it's hotter in the hue spectrum. And so all I'm doing is like letting you know there is a gotcha. The terms are inconsistent. They change from scale to scale. So just watch out this when you're going between the lingo of circadian design versus regular visual design. I hope this gives you a better sense of where those color terms probably come from. And I hope you can now see that when you can understand some of the physical qualities of light, that the psychology of color is a little bit less esoteric, because now we can start grounding it in something real. And this is what helps you to understand how terms like warm and cool aren't just metaphors. They're not arbitrary, but they're associations we hold that are grounded in our physical experience of colors. And this is the starting point for understanding the psychology of color. If you found this video helpful, I'd be totally grateful for a thumbs up. It really helps me to provide free teaching, and I'm rolling out a series of videos on the psychology of color, so hit subscribe if you'd like to follow along. I'll see you in the next one.